Hey guys, it's Tyler. Thank you to everyone that just randomly showed up on my last two videos. I certainly wasn't expecting that honestly quite low effort D&D video to have almost 3,000 views in a few days, and the video after that to have 1,000 views. I guess the algorithm has somewhat found me. We'll see how long that lasts. Usually, those sort of things, in my experience, only last for a few videos and then let me go down. But thank you to all the new subscribers, of course. We broke the 150 mark, and it's a small milestone for a lot of people. But if I think there's 172 people in my house right now, we'd have the fire marshal over. So thank you, truly. I wanted to do the inverse of the last video because some people were confused and were saying like, wait, some of the points sounds like you're actually making uh, a values proposition for rules light systems, not crunchy systems. There's a part of this that I leave out that I thought was obvious that may not have been obvious, which is that video is on the exception, right? That video is about what you should do, how you should adjudicate when you forget one of the rules in your crunchy system. Ideally, you're not forgetting rules so often that it becomes the rule. If you can't remember things that you're bringing up super often, right? Like I mentioned, you have a character that's grappling all the time and you can't remember the grappling rules. Well, then, yeah, you probably shouldn't be playing that system, or you should be modifying that system to make the rules easier. Alternatively, you should have a cheat sheet up like for Pathfinder First Edition has the infamous grappling flowchart, but it's one page. It's easy to keep. I know I have a a video on role playing without opening the book to stop and look up rules, but that's different than having just one sheet that you can glance over and go, oh, okay, that's what I do. Brief pause is a lot different than spending minutes in what's supposed to be a tense combat situation to look up a rule. That was the whole purpose of that video in a nutshell, is to say you can make up a ruling on the fly if you know the core mechanic. That shouldn't be what you're doing every single time. Otherwise, yes, it defeats the purpose of running the crunchy system in the first place. Thought that was obvious. If it's not, there you go. Second thing, I wanted to elaborate more on the problems that rules light systems have because I didn't really delve into that too much. And I find this is mostly to do with combat, but it can happen with out of character situations as well. Which is that sometimes rules light systems are so light that you merely have a stat. You don't have any skills, you just have like your 4 or 5 stats, like a lot of the one page RPGs, but you're limited by a design constraint, a self imposed design constraint, though, so I won't be um, uh, too easy on them for that. But sometimes you have like D&D 5th edition is not a rules light system by any means, but it is a skills light system. It has the opposite issue, I would say, where out of combat your options are just so samey that if you play a character that's good at talking to people, a charismatic character, you end up interacting with the game in the same way every time you play a charismatic character. Now, I did not play 5th edition the most of anybody, but I did play it, 6 campaigns. I've played probably 40, 50 sessions of it, and it just felt very samey outside of combat. Um, People will often say D&D 5th edition is a decent, like, high fantasy combat simulator, and that's about it. And I would say that that's a pretty apt comparison. But again, this isn't about 5e. That's just it's the biggest and probably best example because you can flavor your descriptions in so many different ways. Sure, you can just talk to the other character, that you're trying to convince to do something in a different way. But if you don't have the different skills in order to make that compelling, if it's just always I roll diplomacy, I roll insight, I roll diplomacy, I roll insight, and you're just doing this back and forth and back and forth, how many sessions can you get out of that before you get real bored? Combat's the worst one in my opinion. when you have games that just have like your character just has melee combat, ranged combat as two skills, there's a bunch of systems for which that's true. The Hyper Light Drifter game is one, and that I could see. I like that system, but I could see it getting very old if you played more than 2 or 3 sessions of it, right? And how many different ways can you describe your attacks without the mechanics supporting that different description before you get bored of it, right? And before you stop thinking as your character and you start thinking, it doesn't really matter how I describe this because there's not, the mechanics aren't really going to change. And then you start getting combats that are just, oh, I attack it. Oh, I try to block it. Oh, and the descriptions start getting as light as the mechanics. This is all in my experience, of course. Your mileage may vary. The alternative to this is that the GM tries to come up with rules on the fly, the rulings not rules crowd. And I hate that term because I bought a core rule book. I didn't buy a core rulings book. Which is to say, that would be a book full of nothing, and I would have to write the entire game, right? When we have just the core mechanic and just a few skills, just enough to get by, well, we run into things like, here's a common one, systems that don't have any grappling mechanics. Well, grabbing people, and this isn't about simulationism, as some people pointed out. It's like, well, tabletop RPGs aren't great at simulationism, and I agree with that. However, think about every piece of fiction where somebody ever gets grabbed. In a knife fight, somebody stabs their knife and they grab and they're sitting here and they're holding and it's kind of dumb. It's not a very realistic fight scene, but it's something that happens and it can be compelling for the drama of the situation. What if you just have this physical combat stat, this melee combat skill? It's like, okay, are you also good at grappling? Well, okay, I'll accept that you can also be good at grappling with the same skill, but how do you grapple? Are we going to say that's immobilizing you altogether? Are we going to say that's immobilizing just that limb? What can you do with a grappled individual? Can you do joint locks and this sorts of stuff? And for some people, it may be fine to just not think about that at all and just go, well, just abstract everything. But the problem is your descriptions, how you're saying that you're role-playing through combat, because you are role-playing through combat, right? Right? They start getting really lame because, well, there's no backbone, the mechanics, to support your descriptions, right? And eventually, the combat's going to get to be a slog. It's something to just pass numbers through and just hopefully get on to the next thing. How many videos do you see of people mentioning that combat's a slog because they just keep doing the same thing over and over again? This can be a problem in crunchy systems that don't have the best rules too, like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons in general, where you just end up meeting the other character and you just roll attack back and forth until one of you's out of your bag of hit points. It can be a problem there too, but there are at least rules in place that make it more compelling. You have the optional rules for targeted hits. You can describe how you attempt to step out of the way of somebody's attack and cut their hands off as they do it, or you're tired of this combat dragging on, so you just deflect and go straight for the throat, what have you. But when you're in a rules-light system, you're going to have to come up with something on the spot unless you just always want to have that character or that player failing. Oh, what, I never get to hit them in the neck unless, they're almost dead? Okay, great, except I'm gonna start noticing that. I know what you're doing after a while, right? Or alternatively, you could at the end of the session go, here's a rule I made up on the fly. Did we like that rule? Okay, how could we make it better? Let's write it down. And now you're just making a crunchy system. So why didn't you just start with the crunchy system and do, to me, what's easier: cut away excess subsystems, modify rules you don't like, rather than doing what the writers and editors were supposed to do in the first place and give you a system that functions. So, yeah. If you're fine with that, if you're fine with that level of abstraction, if you only plan on playing the system, 2 or 3 times and then moving on to another system, and there are lots of groups like that, there's not really an issue with rules light systems. But for me, things start to get a little samey. They start to get a little old. I'm a combat sports instructor, though, so I'm going to fixate on that sort of thing. This is a me problem, but it's also a problem for people at my table. People at my table don't tend to like rules light systems for the same reasons. Are a lot of them also in combat sports because they're my friends? Yes, but that tells you that it's a problem with a group of people, and maybe you're part of that group. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. If you're one of the people that complain about me rambling and the long pregnant pauses in my videos, this channel is probably not for you, I'm sorry to say, because I'm not going to edit them out. My channel is in general low effort, especially on the editing side. I do these with my phone. I cram them into YouTube. I don't have infinite time in the day. Role-playing and YouTubing is not my only hobby, so I am certainly not going to spend any more time than I do on this. Let me know your thoughts. I try to respond to all my comments. They're at least the good and coherent ones, and there are a lot of those. I don't get notifications for every single one of them, especially when there's like 100+ comments on them. Again, thank you guys. That's kind of taken me aback. I'm looking at 2.6 thousand views in 4 days, and I'm like, wow. All right. Thank you guys. And let me know if this topic warrants a third video. See ya.